angels, it's Hailey Reese and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am so grateful that you are here and I really and truly do hope that you are having an absolutely incredible morning, afternoon, or night, whatever it is for you when this video finally reaches you. Welcome back to yet another episode in this year's 31 Days of Halloween, where I upload a new video here on my channel every single day for 31 days straight, and it would not be October or 31 days of Halloween without yet another Ouija board experience video. Now, today's true Ouija board experience is really eerie, but beyond that, it's different than others we've taken a look at because this one has documentation from the individual who believes they were possessed after utilizing a Ouija board and their family, those that were living with them during the time of this whole ordeal. Now, this case is dark, it's scary, and it's said to be 100% true. So with that being said, sit back, relax, and maybe turn a light on because today's video is about to get dark. Now, we have talked a lot about Ouija boards here on my channel. I've told you guys my family's personal experiences with Ouija boards, the time that one of my friends had an absolutely traumatizing Ouija board experience that was that out of a movie pretty much, and the fact that when you utilize a Ouija board, you truly are opening the door to the unknown and you don't always get to decide what walks through it. There are many people this time of year who look at the Ouija board as nothing more than a fun game or a cheap thrill, but beyond that, so many people tend to utilize the Ouija board without taking into consideration the many rules that accompany the board. While the list isn't miles long, the list is very, very important. We've talked a lot about Ouija board rules in the past, but the most important being to take the experience seriously and to be able to notice the warning signs of when things could be going very wrong. This experience centers around a girl named Chrissy who was 17 years old at the time of her Ouija board encounter. Now, her family claims that this experience happened years ago and yet to this day has left the family traumatized. And that's where this story begins in the summer when the two girls were heading to the convenience store. Now, to kind of set up the visual of this time in their lives and the way that their day-to-day life looked, the two girls lived in a small little city where everybody basically knew each other, and in the summer, everybody tended to frequent the same spots, the same convenience store, the same mall, the same park. Everybody at one point or another would know of one another or at least have came across one another at some point or another. On this particular summer day, the two girls had decided to walk to the store to get some candy, and that was when they would notice that there were two new kids sitting outside on the porch of a home known to the locals as the Ghost House. This was the home of urban legends around town where many people claimed that years and years prior there had been some sort of a murder that had taken place, and that in the years following there had been a ton of seances trying to communicate with the deceased. The home had gained its name the Ghost House because, well, everybody thought that the house was haunted. It became a local Halloween attraction and a spot where all the kids would gather to tell their ghost stories. So when the two girls noticed the other two girls sitting on the porch, it caught their attention right away. Not only because they were wondering why there was somebody sitting on the porch steps, but also because they were wondering why they looked so alike. And that was when the two girls would walk over to introduce themselves to these twins. The girls would quickly learn that the twins called themselves the Madison twins, and they said that they were new to the neighborhood. Both girls remember feeling as though the twins were a little bit socially awkward. Neither one of them tended to make eye contact. It seemed as though they were looking through the girls or even just around the girls. And Lex said that the Madison twins had what felt like a nervous energy. They always seemed to be on edge or very aware of their surroundings. The two girls said that the energy was so strange with the Madison twins that they wanted to leave immediately, and so the two of them did exactly that. But pretty much every day for the following weeks, they would see the Madison twins sitting there on the front porch steps. Now, one night, everything would absolutely change. By the ghost house, not too far up the road, there was an abandoned barn that many of the local kids would hang out at. This was a spot that the local teenagers would throw bush parties or hang out at during the day, but at night, that spot would take an energetic turn. But on this night, the two girls would run into the Madison twins again. The Madison twins would walk up to Chrissy and Lex, and within their hands, they were holding a Ouija board. The girls remembered the Ouija board looking like it had been quite used. It looked old, and while they couldn't see any dust on the board, they could tell that the board had definitely been used a fair share of times. When they asked the twins what they were doing, the twins said they were going down to the old barn to try to talk to these spirits that everybody talks about in town. And for whatever reason, Chrissy would turn to Lex and say that they should go. Now, this would be a decision that they would regret for the rest of their lives, because what would transpire over the next couple of hours would change the trajectory of all their futures. The last thing that Chrissy remembers is sitting down in almost a circle with the three other girls. The Madison twins were sitting to her left, and Lex was sitting to her right. The twins lit a couple of candles and instructed the other two to place their hands on the planchette. They began calling out to the local spirits and asking if they could come forward, tell the girls what really had happened. Now, Chrissy remembers the planchette starting to move in a very fast and forceful manner, moving all over the board from one letter to another, one number to another, and this seemed to excite the twins. The twins, who were before pretty expressionless, started to get excited as whatever was going on amped up. Chrissy remembers feeling like nothing to do with this was real, that the twins were trying to scare her. It was dark, the fire was flickering, and as she looks up, she sees what looks to be a little girl in a white dress in the empty barn doors. She could see the little girl lit up from the little bit of light outside and could see that her dress looked really dirty. The little girl began looking at her straight into her soul, much like the twins had, and Chrissy remembers looking around and realizing that nobody else was acknowledging the little girl. She was in fact yelling out to them to look, 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 and as the planchette kept moving, nobody acknowledged Chrissy. The next thing Chrissy remembers is waking up in her bedroom with both her parents in the room and Lex sitting next to her on the bed crying. Lex would have to fill in the blanks for Chrissy as to what had happened at the barn because Chrissy remembered nothing other than the planchette moving, seeing that little girl, and then waking up in her bed. Lex told Chrissy that all of a sudden the board started spelling out Chrissy's name, Krissy, over and over and over again. Now, Lex said she started to get scared by the look on Chrissy's face. Her eyes were fixated straight to the doors of the barn, and she wasn't responding to any of the calls that Lex was making toward her. Lex was repeating her name over and over again and asking everyone to stop, but was too afraid to take her own hands off the planchette. Now, Lex said that Chrissy's eyes started to change and they almost went entirely black. And that was when Chrissy started talking in a language that Lex had never heard her speak before. Lex started screaming at this point because Chrissy started shaking and moving in ways that seemed unnatural. Now, for a moment there, Lex started to think this was all some sort of a prank. It was really unlike Chrissy to even want to go hang out with anyone else, let alone the strange Madison twins, but yet she'd been so eager to go down to the barn. Then suddenly she'd locked her eyes towards the barn and started spelling out her name over and over and over again. But any doubt that Lex had quickly went away when Lex would realize that Chrissy's nose was bleeding. Lex said immediately when she saw the blood, she pulled her hands off the planchette and started shaking Chrissy to come to. She said she looked over at the Madison twins and they were both just looking over to Chrissy with smiles on their face and no alarm whatsoever to the fact that she was unresponsive with a nosebleed. Lex said she was there shaking Chrissy, and when she turned to the twins to ask for them to get help, She realized that the twins were no longer there, and neither was the board. Somehow, in the chaos of everything that was going on with Chrissy, the twins had left and taken the board with them, and it was only Chrissy and Lex sitting in the barn. Lex said that she grabbed her phone, she called for Chrissy's parents, and they came and picked the girls up. But the entire way back to Chrissy's house, Chrissy was mumbling under her breath and repeating phrases that sounded like another language over and over and over again. And anytime anybody tried to talk to her, she was completely out of it. In fact, it was said that Chrissy's parents wanted to take her to the hospital, but they couldn't figure out what exactly was going on, so decided to take her home first. When Chrissy came to, she had absolutely no recollection of this and barely remembered anything beyond the initial movement of the board. She didn't even remember her name being spelled. Chrissy started having nightmares about the barn, finding herself sitting back in the middle of the barn, but surrounded by what feels like nothing but doom and evil. And all she could smell in this dream was this horrible smell of death. Chrissy says in one particular dream, she remembers feeling a burning sensation in her fingers as she looks down and sees the planchette in her hands. When she wakes up, she looks down to her hands and sees that there's blood on her fingers, and her fingernails were broken down to just the skin. As she looked around her bedroom, it seemed as though she had clawed chunks out of her walls, writing words over and over and over again, some in Latin and some just symbols that nobody could make out at all. Over the weeks, Chrissy's health would begin to decline and decline as she would stop eating, start bursting out in anger towards people, and start sleepwalking throughout the night as well, waking up in various points throughout the house. Sometimes her parents would wake up to her standing over them in the night with those same black eyes and no expression. Other nights they'd find Chrissy at the kitchen island scribbling drawings all over any piece of paper or wall or surface she could find. Her family wasn't religious, but when they would start to pray or even try to bless their home as things would get worse and worse, the behavior of Chrissy would just amp up more and more. Her adventures in the night were becoming more and more dangerous. She'd be found climbing on top of furniture and carving things into surfaces. At one point, her dad would catch her carving into the couch, into the walls, and they'd even find her sometimes in the backyard digging in the dirt. At one point or another, Chrissy's mom found her in the middle of the night digging through the trash and trying to eat rotten meat from the garbage. Chrissy's parents were desperate. At this point, they'd had her in and out of doctor's appointments. They were talking to professionals, enrolling her in therapy, trying to get to the bottom of why Chrissy was lashing out and acting out like this. Again, they knew that the girls had played with the Ouija board, but they weren't a religious family and couldn't understand why a couple of teenagers playing with a Ouija board would cause such a massive mental health decline. The doctors and the therapists advised that Chrissy and her family would take notes and log in journals the experiences that Chrissy was happening and all the different outbursts that would go on throughout the week so that they could go over it with the doctor and try to better understand Chrissy's condition. Now, looking here, when Chrissy was asked to describe what she remembers from the barn, she simply says, "We went to the old barn, the Ouija board, me, the Madison twins, and Lex. It was completely rotted out and smelled almost like mold, but we thought it would be fun. I don't know why. I've never played anything like that before, and I didn't really have an interest to. They brought the Ouija board for fun, and I thought to just mess around. But the planchette did move. None of us pushed it. Everyone tells me now that it spelt out Chrissy. All I remember is the kid. She didn't look like a shadow. She looked like a real kid, in a white dress with dirt. I try to laugh it off now, but all of my dreams revolve around this barn." When given a prompt to talk about what's going on in the night, Chrissy would write that she can't sleep, keep seeing that barn in my dreams, and waking up in front of the mirror. The barn's not decayed in my dreams, but it is alive in a way. It looks like the barn is breathing. Something feels like it might be watching me, like maybe eyes glowing. But then when it whispers my name, it's not with a real voice. It's in my head. In the dreams, no one else seems to see it. Kind of reminds me of the little memories I have. I always wake up screaming. Mom thinks maybe I'm stressed. Don't think it's stress though. Now, at one point, Chrissy was asked if she was still seeing things, if she'd seen any more people or any more things, or what was going through her mind when she would be carving into the walls or drawing on the paper. She did say, well, now lights flicker when I'm alone. My phone has been going off all by itself too. Whenever I try to talk about things, it seems like the dreams get worse. I also have been finding a lot of dead animals. Specifically found some dead birds on my windowsill yesterday, 3 of them perfectly lined up. Dad thought maybe that they'd crashed into the window, but I think that seems like a pretty crazy thing to have happened. I do hear scratching inside the walls at night, so I wonder if that's why I scratch at the walls too. Or maybe I'm just hearing myself scratching before I wake up. Either way, I can't sleep at all, and it's only making me more and more nauseous. In one instance, they document Chrissy waking up with dirt under her fingernails, and also talking about how she was no longer leaving her room, how there were bruises all over her that she did not remember, and she was frequently asked by doctors and medical professionals where these bruises were coming from. Some of them seemed like grab marks, but Chrissy had zero explanation for these bruises. Chrissy goes on to talk about how she does black out and has been losing her time, and that her reflection in the mirror sometimes seems to be smiling when she's not. Now, they do note that a lot of these things that are going on could be attributed to lack of sleep. And I can actually understand this because I shared with you guys recently that when I didn't sleep for an extended period of time, I started seeing some pretty terrifying things too that were very, very, very much real to me. And yet I was being told that they weren't. So the lack of sleep wasn't too far-fetched, but her parents' journal entries really paint a light on how dark things were getting in the family home. When asked about any behavioral changes, Chrissy's mom would say here that Chrissy just isn't herself. She barely speaks. She stares into corners like she's listening to something, and that she used to be so bright and funny, but now she's really, really cold and hostile. She says that one night she was screaming in a voice that didn't even sound like hers. People keep telling her that it's for attention, but the voice seemed deeper. Her parents, and more specifically her dad, note a lot about the smell in her room, saying that there's a real smell like a rot or sulfur coming from Chrissy's room. The dad says, we've checked for mold, for dead animals, and nothing. She's stopped eating. Her eyes are bloodshot all the time. She even says phrases now like she's not alone in her body anymore. Both of her parents note at this time as well that they're becoming increasingly terrified of their own teenage daughter. Her behavior is becoming far and far more unpredictable, violent, and just outright terrifying. Chrissy's mom also notes here about the scratches, saying that Chrissy had scratches down her back pretty much every morning when she was waking up. They were long, deep, and like claws. Now, when her parents were taking her to the doctor about these things, especially the ones that were physically manifesting, there was a good amount of them that felt as though this was for attention somehow. And a lot of the time, they were looking towards the parents as if they were enabling the behavior by acknowledging it. But in one entry here, her mom states, we took her to the doctor, and once again, this new doctor thought she was doing it to herself. But last night I watched her sleep, and the scratches appeared in the morning while all night she laid still. And again, no doctors could really explain this either. They kind of said perhaps the scratches were done prior and they only really showed up that morning, but these scratches were red, inflamed, raised, and seemingly fresh. Her dad notes about Chrissy waking up at very strange late hours of the night and early morning, how she stands in the hallway and recites things in Latin. When asked about it, her father said that they do not speak Latin. They began recording these instances to show to the doctors to say, hey, our kid does not speak Latin. But with modern technology, the doctors would just come back with saying that Chrissy could really be doing any of this at any point in time. She could be learning a new language and they didn't even know it. The one night, Chrissy's mom woke up and found Chrissy in the bathroom, banging her head lightly over and over and over again off of the mirror, repeating about the man in the barn, the man in the barn. Her mom followed the instructions of doctors to try to gently wake her up and slowly bring her back to reality, but Chrissy absolutely lost it and started screaming and clawing at her skin to get it out. Now, creative writing was suggested to Chrissy throughout therapy to get these emotions out, all these thoughts that were going on within her mind, and they suggested that she could write a poem about the feelings that she's felt ever since that first night after the barn. And one of her things was, I am not Chrissy. She is gone. She opened the door and let me walk in. Try the prayers, burn the sage. This is mine now, and I'm not leaving. And then on that same page, there was repeated scribbled drawings that looked like the barn, and it repeated down the page, the Madison twins, the Madison twins, the Madison twins. Now, nobody really knew who these Madison twins were. So Chrissy's parents went back to Lex and started asking her more about the night that all this had first happened. Lex told the parents that she's never seen anything like what happened to Chrissy that night in the barn, and that none of it felt like a game, nor did it feel like Chrissy was trying to scare her. The board spelled out Chrissy's name, and her whole face changed. It was like she wasn't blinking. The twins kind of laughed, but Chrissy didn't. She stared at the board and then the barn door. She said something that I didn't recognize, and then I felt the air turn cold before she would start to shake, repeat words, and bleed through her nose. When they had called her to first come visit about a week or two after the initial incident, it said that when Lex went to visit her, she would not let her in the room, and that when Lex finally caught a glimpse of her and said hi, her eyes went black again like they had that first night, and it seemed as though Chrissy didn't even recognize her. Now, when Lex and Chrissy's parents went to go and find the Madison twins to ask if they saw anything or had experienced anything afterwards, well, the Madison twins never existed. According to Chrissy and Lex, they had 100% met, seen, and played the Ouija board with the Madison twins, but yet nobody else in town knew of the Madison twins. Nobody lived in the home that they were frequently on the steps of, and there was no trace in the barn of any Ouija board or anything from the night at all. But yet even Chrissy, though her memory has been terrible since the incident, remembers sitting down with the Madison twins and playing the Ouija board, as does Lex. Now, it's unclear how exactly they were able to rid Chrissy of this spirit or entity. It does state that Chrissy's parents had to turn to some spiritual practices to individuals who have experience in these types of hauntings, possessions, and attachments, and they had to open up their minds and world to the idea that perhaps in touching that Ouija board, the girls had opened a portal and Chrissy had let something in. What's really eerie is that after it seems the family sought help, there's no more logs, there's no more updates, and there's no more trace of Chrissy or where her life took her. To my understanding and my hope, they were able to recognize the attachment and to rid Chrissy of whatever had attached itself to her that night in the barn. But there are so many questions around this case because while it's documented by many of witnesses, it's not just Chrissy telling her story. There are others who saw this happening firsthand. Nobody knows where the Ouija board came from, who those Madison twins were, or where they lived or came from either. And yet all anybody really knows is that Chrissy and Lex went to that barn and Chrissy was never the same afterward. Either way, this case is one, especially around this time of year, to be a cautionary tale of why it's so important to take use of a Ouija board seriously. But that is basically the terrifying Ouija board possession of Chrissy and the documentation by her family of everything that happened after touching the board. What do you guys think of this experience? What do you think about the fact that the Madison twins seemingly disappeared? I would love to know all of your thoughts, opinions, and theories down below. Have you ever played with a Ouija board, or what are your views on the Ouija board? I would love to know that down below as well, along with any video requests that you may have for my upcoming videos. But with that being said, that is it for today's video. If you guys are new to my channel or you are just not yet subscribed, but you enjoy my content, I would love it more than you would ever know if you would go ahead and click that subscribe button, and please give this video a big thumbs up if you did enjoy it. It really, really helps both me and my channel, so I know what content you're enjoying, and therefore I can be making more of it. Remember, my loves, do all things with kindness, and until tomorrow, I love you. Bye, guys.